Meg Sob says Spotify axed Archetypes podcast after failing to reach top 100, cancels the Sussexes contract. Did you know that Spotify paid Meghan Markle more than $18 million for Archetypes podcast? Meghan and Harry's show Archetypes fails to make profit, and Spotify cuts 200 jobs. Spotify announced that they may slash 200 more jobs after Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's famous audio deal, Archetypes podcast, could not make the profit it expected. Looks like nothing is working for Harry and Meghan. First, there was a clash with the British royal family, and now Meghan and Harry's Archetypes podcast fails to rake cash after Spotify paid Meghan Markle more than $18 million for the show, and not to forget Harry and Meghan's rumored divorce. According to a report published in Hindustan Times, Spotify may slash 200 more jobs after Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's famous audio deal couldn't make a profit. It was reported that the company paid more than $18 million for it. The Swedish streaming giant now has to part ways with the multiple staffers. Spotify laid off about 6% of its 6,000 workforce back in January. Redundancies are now said to be reaching 2% of the streaming platform's workforce, according to New York Post Spotify head of podcast business, Sahara Labashi, writing in a blog post, quote, "We have made the difficult but necessary decision to make a strategic realignment of our group and reduce our global podcast vertical and other functions by approximately 200 people, or 2% of Spotify's workforce." Before that, Spotify is set to slash a further 200 jobs after Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's highly publicized audio deal failed to rake in the expected sum of cash. This will mark the company's second round of redundancies this year that follows hot on the heels of its huge investment into the podcast industry. In January, it was announced that Spotify laid off some 6% of its 6,000-strong workforce. As the streaming platform gears up to scale down its internal operations, redundancies are now officially reaching 2% of its entire workforce, a staggering number considering how recent the investment took place. In a blog post on the streaming platform, Spotify's head of podcast business, Sahara Labashi, wrote, "We are expanding our partnership efforts with leading podcasters from across the globe with a tailored approach optimized for each show and creator. This fundamental pivot from a more uniform proposition will allow us to support the creator community even better. However, doing so requires adapting. As a result, we have made the difficult but necessary decision to make a strategic realignment of our group and reduce our global podcast vertical and other functions by approximately 200 people, or 2% of Spotify's workforce. The cuts prove that the company is failing to see the results it had hoped for in the podcast arena, despite pumping billions of dollars into having Markle and Joe Rogan's podcast on its platform." Markle's Archetypes podcast has struggled to remain at the top since its debut in August of last year, as by November, the podcast slid down to number 22 in the charts. For his part, Rogan's podcast suffered a series of controversies ranging from COVID-19 misinformation to being accused of using racial slurs and making anti-Semitic comments. In 2021, it was reported that Meghan and Harry received a cool $25 million from Spotify for signing on the dotted line for lucrative